The broken navigator. Marcus Chin stared into his glass and wondered if the amber liquid inside was actually whiskey or just recycled coolant with flavor additives. Either way, it burned going down, which was exactly what he needed. The bar around him hummed with the usual chaos of Crossroads Haven, a neutral station floating in the dead space between three territorial borders where nobody asked questions and everybody had something to hide. His ship, the Wandering Star, sat cold and useless in docking bay 17 with a quantum drive that had decided to die mid-jump. Marcus had limped into the station on emergency thrusters, burning through fuel reserves he couldn't afford to replace. Now he sat in a dive bar that smelled like oil and desperation, doing the math in his head for the 100th time. The numbers never improved. "Another," he said, sliding his glass across the scarred metal counter. The bartender, a Krovan with blue-gray skin and three eyes arranged in a triangle pattern, refilled the glass without comment. His species was known for their stoic nature and exceptional hearing, which made them excellent bartenders in places like this. They heard everything and said nothing. Marcus took another drink and surveyed the bar. Traders, smugglers, mercenaries, refugees, all the beautiful disasters that made up the fringe of civilized space. This was where careers came to die, where people ran when they had nowhere else to go. You fit right in. 5 years ago, he'd been chief navigator on the mining vessel Prosperity. Good pay, good crew, a future that looked stable. Then came the accident. A pocket of volatile gas in an asteroid field, an explosion that tore through 3 compartments, and 17 people dead including his best friend. The inquiry cleared him of negligence, but Marcus knew the truth. He'd missed the warning signs in the sensor data. He'd been tired, distracted, and 17 people paid the price. After that, he couldn't bear working with a crew anymore. He bought the Wandering Star with his settlement money, took solo salvage jobs, and tried to outrun his memories. Now even that was falling apart. The bar's atmosphere shifted. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they got quieter, more cautious. Marcus had enough experience in rough stations to recognize trouble when it walked through the door. 3 figures entered, moving with the aggressive swagger of people who'd learned that violence solved most problems. They wore mismatched armor and carried weapons openly, which was technically against station regulations but rarely enforced in this sector. Mercenaries or pirates, the line was pretty thin out here. The lead man was built like a cargo hauler, all bulk and scarred knuckles. His companions flanked him as they approached the bar, and Marcus saw the Krovan bartender's third eye narrow with recognition and displeasure. "We had a conversation last week," the big man said, slamming a hand on the counter. The sound echoed through the suddenly quiet bar. "About station fees and protection services." "I remember," the bartender replied, his voice carefully neutral. "I remember saying no. That's disappointing." The mercenary leaned forward. "This is a dangerous place. Accidents happen. Would be a shame if your environmental systems failed or your liquor supply got contaminated. Or maybe someone gets hurt during a random mugging. You understand what I'm saying?" Marcus took another drink and tried to mind his own business. He had enough problems without adding bar fight to the list. But he watched in the mirror behind the counter, old instincts from his military days refusing to fully shut down. The bartender's 3 eyes remained steady. "I understand you're trying to extort me." The answer is still no. One of the mercenary's companions moved to block the exit while the other let his hand rest on his weapon. The big man's smile turned ugly. "Wrong answer, friend." That's when the hooded figure moved. Marcus barely tracked it. One moment she'd been sitting alone in a corner booth, just another anonymous traveler keeping her head down. The next she was between the mercenaries and the bar, moving with a fluid grace that spoke of serious training. The lead mercenary's expression shifted from confidence to confusion to pain in rapid succession as his arm bent backward at an angle arms weren't designed to reach. He screamed. His companion on the left lunged forward and found himself face first on the floor before he'd completed 2 steps, his weapon clattering across the deck plates. The third mercenary froze with his hand halfway to his holster, suddenly reconsidering every decision that had led him to this moment. "Gentlemen," the hooded woman said, her voice carrying an accent Marcus couldn't place, vowels that seemed to sing in consonants sharp as breaking glass. "I suggest you leave. No. And perhaps consider a different line of work. I hear the station is hiring maintenance crews." They left, stumbling over themselves in their haste. The one who'd been thrown actually apologized to a chair he knocked over. The bar gradually returned to its normal volume of conversation, though now everyone was stealing glances at the hooded woman. She walked back toward her booth where 2 other hooded figures sat, both radiating the same controlled danger. But she paused at the bar first, Accepting a glass of water the Krovan bartender offered with what looked like genuine respect. That's when Marcus saw her face as she pushed back her hood just enough to drink. His alcohol-fogged brain took several seconds to process what he was seeing. Her features were elegant and sharp, with high cheekbones and a jawline that could cut glass. But it was her ears that marked her heritage, elongated and tapering to delicate points, emerging from hair so dark it seemed to absorb light. Her eyes, when they briefly met his in the mirror, were the color of molten gold. Seraphian. One of them, the ancient civilization that had been traveling between stars when humans were still figuring out agriculture. Their empire spanned 40 systems, their technology made human engineering look like children's toys, and their society was so complex that diplomatic corps officers spent years just learning basic etiquette. And this woman had just taken down 3 armed men with the casual efficiency of someone swatting insects. The whiskey had done its work. Marcus's mouth engaged before his brain could stop it. He turned on his stool, propped himself up with what he imagined was casual confidence but probably looked more like structural failure, and grinned. "Nice moves," he said. "You always play hero, or is today special?" She turned those golden eyes on him fully, and Marcus felt the temperature drop several degrees. The entire bar went quiet again, but this time the silence had a different quality. Someone near the back actually got up and left. "Do you know who I am?" she asked. The question wasn't hostile, just genuinely curious, as if she'd discovered an interesting specimen and wanted to understand it better. Marcus's survival instincts were screaming warnings that the alcohol completely drowned out. He gave her his best lopsided grin, the one that had gotten him out of exactly 4 situations and into roughly 60 others. "The sexiest alien woman alive," he said. The silence achieved a density that probably violated physics. Her 2 companions went rigid, hands moving toward weapons with practiced synchronicity. The Krovan bartender made a sound like air escaping a breached hull. Several patrons near the door quietly excused themselves. She stared at him. Marcus stared back, his whiskey-soaked brain slowly beginning to realize that something had gone terribly wrong but unable to identify exactly what. Then she laughed. It was a sound like crystal bells in a wind that carried music from impossible distances. Her shoulders shook with genuine amusement, and the deadly tension in her companions eased slightly, though they still watched Marcus like he was an armed explosive. "Well," she said, her voice rich with something Marcus's intoxicated mind couldn't interpret, "that is certainly a new response." She replaced her hood in one smooth motion, nodded to the bartender, and walked toward the exit. Her companions fell into formation around her like planets orbiting a star, and they vanished into the station's crowded corridors. Marcus turned back to his drink, feeling pleased with himself. He'd made her laugh. That was something. The Krovan bartender was staring at him with all 3 eyes, expressing what could only be described as existential horror. "You absolute fool," he said, his normally calm voice cracking slightly. "Do you have any idea what you just did? Made a lady laugh?" Marcus offered, suddenly less confident. "That was Empress Lyra Solarin of the Seraphian Empire. You just called the most powerful woman in 3 sectors the sexiest alien alive." Marcus looked at his empty glass. Then at the door where she disappeared. Then back at his glass. His brain began cataloging exactly how catastrophically he'd miscalculated. The Seraphian Empire. 40 systems. Countless billions of citizens. A military that could glass planets. An intelligence network that probably knew his shoe size and childhood fears. And their empress, who he'd just propositioned while drunk in a dive bar. "So," Marcus said slowly, "on a scale of 1 to 10, how dead am I?" "There isn't a scale that goes high enough," the bartender replied. Marcus raised his glass toward the absent empress. "At least it's a good story." He woke to the certainty that he'd died and the afterlife had terrible lighting. His quarters on Crossroads Haven consisted of a sleeping pod barely large enough for his frame, a hygiene unit that made concerning noises, and a storage locker he'd been using as furniture. The overhead lights flickered with their usual irregular pulse. His head throbbed with the enthusiastic malice of cheap alcohol working through his system. He groaned, rolled over, and discovered 2 problems with his morning. First, his door was open. He always locked it. Second, there were 2 figures in ceremonial armor standing in his 8-square-meter living space, watching him with the patient stillness of people who got paid to wait. The armor was silver and gold, inlaid with patterns that seemed to move when he looked at them directly. Each figure stood perfectly straight, hands resting on weapons that probably cost more than his ship. Through their helmets' visors, he could see the distinctive elongated features of Seraphians. "Oh no," Marcus said into his pillow. "Please tell me this is a hallucination." Captain Chin, the taller figure said, her voice slightly amplified by her helmet speakers. You are not hallucinating. Please sit up. Can I at least brush my teeth first? If I'm being executed, I want to meet whatever afterlife exists with clean breath. You are not being executed, the shorter guard said, though his tone suggested he might personally prefer that option. Empress Lyra Solarin requests your presence at a formal dinner aboard the Eternal Radiance. Transportation has been arranged. You have 1 standard hour to prepare. Marcus sat up slowly, his brain struggling to process this information through the fog of his hangover. This is a joke, right? Some kind of elaborate prank. This is not a joke, the tall guard said. Her Imperial Majesty was amused by your interaction last evening. She has extended an invitation. Refusal would be diplomatically inadvisable. Amused, Marcus repeated. I called the Empress of the most powerful civilization in known space the sexiest woman alive while drunk off my ass, and she was amused? Her Majesty possesses an unconventional sense of humor, the guard replied, and Marcus detected something in her voice that might have been sympathy. Please prepare yourself. The shuttle departs in 57 minutes. They withdrew to the corridor but didn't leave, standing at attention like very well-armed bookends just outside his door. Marcus sat on his sleeping pod, trying to reconcile his reality with what was happening. Empresses didn't invite random salvage pilots to dinner. Especially not salvage pilots who drunkenly hit on them. This violated several fundamental laws of how the universe worked. He showered in record time, the station's water ration not allowing for existential contemplation. Then he stared at his storage locker with growing despair. He owned 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, 1 jacket with a broken zipper, and boots held together by molecular adhesive and prayer. None of it screamed, appropriate for dining with royalty. The tall guard appeared in his doorway holding a garment bag that probably cost more than his ship's repair bill. Her Majesty anticipated you might lack formal attire, she said. Inside was clothing in deep blue fabric that seemed to shift shades in the light, with silver threading that traced patterns he couldn't quite focus on. When he put it on, it fit perfectly, which raised questions about how they'd obtained his measurements that he decided not to pursue. He looked at himself in the hygiene unit's polished surface and barely recognized the person staring back. Someone who might actually belong at a royal function instead of someone who usually ate ration bars while watching salvaged entertainment videos. The shuttle was waiting in a private dock, sleek and predatory in a way that made his freighter look like a child's toy. The interior was all smooth curves and lighting that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Marcus strapped into a seat that adjusted to his body with unsettling precision while the guards took positions near the cockpit. They launched with barely a vibration. Through the viewport, Crossroads Haven fell away, revealing the massive form of the Eternal Radiance in high orbit. The flagship was beautiful in the way a sword was beautiful, all elegant lines and barely restrained power. It stretched nearly 3 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull adorned with what looked like growing patterns of light, as if someone had convinced electricity to form gardens. How many people does that thing carry? Marcus asked, mostly to distract himself from mounting anxiety. Crew complement of 12,000, the tall guard replied. Plus command staff, research divisions, diplomatic corps, and the royal household. The Eternal Radiance serves as both warship and mobile capital when Her Majesty travels beyond the home world. Right. Of course. Mobile capital. Totally normal thing to have dinner on. The docking procedure took 30 minutes of careful maneuvering through defensive fields that could probably vaporize a small fleet. They settled into a bay that looked carved from a single piece of luminous crystal, all organic curves and bioluminescent accents. Marcus followed the guards through corridors that twisted in ways that suggested the ship's architects had interesting opinions about geometry. Everything was beautiful, everything was alien, and everything reminded him that he absolutely did not belong here. An attendant met them at an intersection, an elderly Seraphian man whose elongated ears bore silver rings denoting some rank Marcus didn't understand. He looked at Marcus the way someone might examine something unpleasant tracked in on a shoe. Captain Chin, he said, the title dripping with barely concealed disdain. I am Counselor Vexer, Chief of Protocol. You will address Her Majesty as Your Imperial Radiance, on first contact, then Your Majesty thereafter. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not make direct eye contact for longer than 3 seconds. You will not touch the royal person. You will. Can I just apologize and go home? Marcus interrupted. Because I'm getting the sense that nobody actually wants me here. Vexer's expression suggested Marcus had just violated several natural laws. Her Majesty's invitations are not refused. Ever. The dinner will consist of 12 courses across 3 hours. You will use the appropriate utensils for each. 12 courses? I usually eat protein bars over my cargo manifest. Then tonight will be educational, Vexer said coldly. Try not to embarrass yourself more than absolutely necessary. They arrived at doors that rose 15 meters high, carved with scenes Marcus couldn't begin to interpret. Somewhere beyond them, an empress who could order his death with a gesture was waiting to have dinner with him. The doors opened with silent majesty, revealing a hall that seemed to stretch into impossible distance. A table ran down its center, laden with settings that gleamed under chandeliers that captured actual starlight. Nobility in elaborate dress lined both sides, their conversations dying as every eye turned toward him. At the far end, elevated on a dais of living crystal, Empress Lyra sat with her chin resting on interlaced fingers. She wore no crown, but authority radiated from her like heat from a star. Her elongated ears caught the light, adorned with jewelry that might have been diamonds or captured fragments of reality itself. Those golden eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his knees consider mutiny. She smiled, slow and dangerous and amused. Captain Chin, her voice carried effortlessly through the hall. How kind of you to accept my invitation. Please take your seat. We have much to discuss. Marcus walked toward his fate on unsteady legs, wondering if the sexiest alien woman alive might also be the last thing he ever saw. The unlikely alliance. The chair assigned to Marcus was positioned 3 seats from the Empress, which felt simultaneously too close and not nearly close enough to any exits. He sat with the careful precision of someone navigating a minefield, hyper-aware that every noble in the hall was watching him like scientists observing a particularly fascinating specimen. The chair itself seemed confused by his presence, adjusting and readjusting until Marcus wanted to tell it to just pick a configuration and commit. A servant materialized at his elbow, they all seemed to materialize rather than walk like normal people, and placed a small plate before him. On it sat something that might have been food or possibly a very small sculpture. It shimmered with an iridescent quality under the light and smelled faintly of citrus and ozone. The opening course, the nobleman to his right whispered with barely concealed horror. Use the smallest fork. Marcus looked at the array of utensils flanking his setting. There were at least 12 implements, possibly more if you counted the things that looked like tiny surgical instruments. He identified what might be the smallest fork, then reconsidered, then picked one at random and offered a silent prayer to whatever gods handled cutlery-based humiliation. The iridescent thing tasted like lightning and flowers. He managed not to make a face, barely. Captain Chin, Empress Lyra said, and the entire hall fell silent with trained efficiency. Tell me what brought you to Crossroads Haven. Besides a malfunctioning quantum drive, which I understand your ship suffered quite spectacularly. Your Majesty has excellent intelligence networks, Marcus said, remembering to drop the full title after first use. I was running a shipment of medical supplies to the frontier colonies. Routine job, boring route, right up until my quantum drive decided existence wasn't worth the effort anymore. A ripple of polite laughter traveled down the table, though Marcus suspected they were laughing at him rather than with him. Lyra's lips curved upward. A ship with existential problems. How very human. And what will you do now? Such repairs are expensive, I imagine. That's the question I've been asking myself, Your Majesty. The answer keeps coming back to either find a miracle or start a new career as a station maintenance worker. Miracles can be arranged, Lyra said, her golden eyes studying him with unnerving intensity. But they often come with conditions. Marcus felt the weight of those words settle over the hall. The nobles exchanged glances and Counselor Vexer, seated near the Empress, looked like he'd just bitten into something toxic. I'm listening, Marcus said, because what else could he say? Finish your dinner first, Lyra replied. We'll speak privately afterward. For now, tell me about yourself, Captain. You served in the Terran Defense Force before becoming a salvage pilot, yes. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of courses that ranged from sublime to utterly baffling. Marcus fumbled through conversations with nobles who seemed fascinated by him the way one might be fascinated by an exotic animal. He told sanitized versions of his military service, carefully edited stories from his salvage work, and tried desperately not to use the wrong utensil or drink from the wrong glass. Through it all, Lyra watched him with those penetrating golden eyes, occasionally asking questions that seemed innocuous but felt like tests he didn't understand. Finally, mercifully, the last course was cleared away. Lyra rose from her seat, and the entire hall rose with her in perfect synchronization. Captain Chin, walk with me, she said, and it wasn't a request. The nobles parted like water as Lyra descended from her dais. Her guards fell into formation around her, and Marcus found himself walking beside an empress through corridors that seemed to exist halfway between reality and dream. The walls themselves appeared to breathe, pulsing with soft bioluminescence. They entered a chamber that was somehow both vast and intimate. One wall was entirely transparent, offering a view of space that made Marcus's breath catch. Stars spread out in impossible profusion, and in the distance, a nebula painted the void in shades of purple and gold. "Leave us," Lyra said to her guards. They hesitated, exchanged glances, then withdrew. The door sealed behind them with a soft whisper. Marcus suddenly felt very alone with the most powerful woman in 3 sectors. "Relax, Captain," Lyra said, moving to a cabinet and pouring 2 glasses of something amber. "I'm not going to execute you for calling me attractive. Honestly, it was the most genuine interaction I've had in months." She offered him a glass, and Marcus took it with hands that only trembled slightly. "Your Majesty, I need to apologize." "Don't." Lyra raised a hand. "Do you know what it's like to be an empress? Every word spoken to you is calculated. Every smile is political. Every interaction is a negotiation. Then you appear drunk and tactless, and say exactly what you think with no agenda whatsoever." It was refreshing. She moved to the window, her silhouette framed against the stars. "But I didn't bring you here for nostalgia. I have a problem, Captain Chin, and I believe you might be the solution." "Me?" "Your Majesty, I'm a broken-down salvage pilot with a dead ship and negative credit balance. I can't imagine what problem I could solve for you." Lyra turned, and the amusement in her expression had been replaced by something harder, more calculating. "Precisely. You're insignificant, no offense intended. You have no political connections, no ties to noble houses, no stake in imperial politics. That makes you perfect." "Perfect for what?" "There's a conspiracy within my court," Lyra said flatly. "Someone is planning to assassinate me during the upcoming diplomatic summit with the Calarian Federation. My intelligence services have confirmed the plot exists but can't identify the traitors. They're too deeply embedded, too careful. Every investigation gets shut down before it bears fruit." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "Your Majesty, this sounds like something for your security forces, not a random human." "My security forces are compromised," Lyra interrupted. "The conspiracy reaches high into the imperial hierarchy. I can't trust my advisors, my guards, even members of my own family are suspect. I need someone outside the system, someone the conspirators would never suspect." "And that's me? A drunk human who hit on you in a bar." "Exactly that." Lyra moved closer, and Marcus could see the weight she carried in her eyes, the burden of ruling an empire while not knowing who wanted her dead. "I need to travel incognito to the frontier, to a station where the conspirators are gathering to finalize their plans. I need to see them with my own eyes, gather evidence that can't be dismissed or buried. And I need a ship that won't raise suspicion." "My ship is broken," Marcus reminded her. "Your ship will be repaired within 3 days using technology that will make it better than new. In exchange, you'll transport me to the frontier, pose as a simple trader, and help me infiltrate the conspiracy. Once we have evidence, you'll bring me back here and I'll deal with the traitors." Marcus drank his entire glass in one swallow. "You want me to help the Empress of the Seraphian Empire play spy on her own people?" "Yes." "And if we're caught? If these conspirators figure out who you are? Then we'll both likely die," Lyra said with brutal honesty. "But if we do nothing, they'll kill me anyway and probably start a civil war that will destabilize 3 sectors. So I'm asking, Captain Chin, will you help me?" Marcus looked at her, really looked at her. Not as an empress, not as the most powerful woman alive, but as someone desperate and alone and running out of options. He saw himself reflected in that desperation, the same feeling he'd carried since the prosperity exploded and took 17 souls with it. Maybe this was his chance at redemption. Maybe it was suicide. Maybe both. "When do we leave?" he asked. 3 days later, Marcus stood in his ship's cargo bay and barely recognized it. The wandering star had been torn apart and rebuilt by Seraphian engineers who apparently viewed human technology the way a master craftsman might view a child's wooden toy, charming but in need of serious improvement. The quantum drive now hummed with barely contained power instead of wheezing like an asthmatic. The hull plating had been reinforced with materials Marcus couldn't identify. The navigation systems were so advanced he'd spent 2 hours just learning the basic functions. Even the coffee maker in his quarters had been upgraded and now produced drinks that actually tasted like coffee instead of disappointment. "Impressive, isn't it?" Lyra said from behind him. Marcus turned and barely recognized her. Gone were the regal bearing and elaborate dress. She wore simple trader clothing, her distinctive ears hidden under a modified headband that created a minor holographic distortion. Contact lenses masked her golden eyes, turning them a ordinary brown. She looked like any other frontier merchant, unremarkable and forgettable. "You clean up nice," Marcus said. "Or down, I guess, in this case." "The art of disguise is looking like you belong," Lyra replied. "And right now, I need to belong anywhere but a throne room." They departed Crossroads Haven under the manifest of a small trading vessel heading to the frontier to buy mineral rights. Nobody questioned it. Nobody cared. That was the beauty of the plan. They were too insignificant to merit attention. The journey to the frontier station took 4 days through jump points that would have made the old wandering star shudder and complain. The new quantum drive handled them like a pleasure cruise. Marcus found himself actually enjoying flying again, the way he had before the accident, before guilt became his constant companion. During the long hours between jumps, he and Lyra talked. Really talked, not the careful political dance of the dinner but genuine conversation. She told him about becoming empress at 23 when her parents and elder brother were killed in a coup attempt. About spending the last 15 years consolidating power while never knowing who truly supported her versus who simply feared her. "I haven't had a real friend since I took the throne," she admitted one evening as they sat in the common area, sharing a meal. "Everyone wants something. Alliance, favor, position, power. Even family members see me as a tool for advancing their house's status." "Sounds lonely," Marcus said. "Unbearably so." She looked at him with those disguised eyes. "What about you? Why does a decorated military navigator end up running salvage alone?" Marcus had spent 5 years avoiding that question. But something about the moment, about sharing this strange journey with this extraordinary woman who'd set aside her empire to trust him, made him want to answer honestly. "I killed 17 people," he said quietly. "Not on purpose. It was an accident, a missed sensor reading, a moment of inattention. But they're still dead and I'm still here and I can't work with a crew anymore because every time I do, I see their faces." Lyra was quiet for a long moment. "Guilt is a heavy burden to carry alone." "So is an empire," Marcus replied. She smiled, sad and understanding. "Indeed." They reached the frontier station, a ramshackle collection of modules and docking tubes called Haven's End, 2 days ahead of schedule. It was perfect for their purposes, barely regulated, crowded with traders and smugglers, the kind of place where you could disappear if you knew how. Marcus docked the Wandering Star in a public bay, and they disembarked carrying nothing that would identify them as anything more than small-time traders hoping to strike a deal. The station smelled like oil, ozone, and desperation. They made their way through crowded corridors to a bar called the Broken Promise, which Lyra's intelligence suggested was the conspirators' meeting place. "Remember," Lyra whispered as they approached, "we're just traders looking for a drink and maybe some information about mineral rights. Let me do most of the talking." The bar was exactly what Marcus expected, dark, grimy, and filled with people who'd rather you didn't look too closely. They found a table in the corner with a clear view of the room and ordered drinks that came in glasses Marcus didn't trust. For 2 hours nothing happened. Then a group entered that made Lyra go very still beside him. 5 Seraphians, dressed in nondescript clothing but moving with military precision. They took a large table near the back and began speaking in low tones. Marcus couldn't hear them, but he saw Lyra's jaw tighten. "That's High Commander Zirith," she breathed. "He commands the Third Fleet. And that's Counselor Marana, head of the Imperial Treasury. If they're here together, this is bigger than I thought. Can you hear what they're saying?" "No, but I need to get closer." "Follow my lead." Lyra stood, affecting a slight drunken wobble, and made her way toward the back as if looking for the facilities. As she passed the conspirators' table, she stumbled, knocking into the High Commander's chair. "Watch it," Zirith snapped. Sorry, Lyra slurred, playing drunk perfectly. "Didn't see you there, friend." She continued past them, but Marcus saw her hand move to her jacket pocket. When she returned to their table, her eyes were bright with triumph. "Got it," she whispered. "Micro-recorder. I planted it under their table. We'll give it an hour to record, then retrieve it and get out." The next hour was the longest of Marcus's life. Every time someone looked their way, his hand drifted toward the concealed weapon Lyra had insisted he carry. But they were invisible, just 2 more traders in a bar full of desperate people. Finally Lyra nodded. "I'll get it. Order another round, make a small fuss about the bill being wrong. Draw attention." Marcus did as instructed, arguing loudly with the bartender about being overcharged. While all eyes were on him, Lyra retrieved the recorder and headed for the exit. Marcus threw some credits on the bar, more than enough to cover the actual bill, and followed her out. They were 3 corridors away when someone shouted behind them. "Stop them." Marcus looked back and saw Xerath emerging from the bar, along with 2 others who moved with the controlled efficiency of trained killers. They'd been made. "Run!" Lyra yelled. They ran, sprinting through the crowded corridors as shouts rose behind them. Marcus led them through a service corridor he'd memorized during docking, then through an emergency access tunnel that dumped them into the maintenance levels. Behind them, footsteps echoed, getting closer. They burst onto the docking level, the wandering star visible 50 meters away. So close. Marcus's chest burned with effort, his legs screaming protest, but he pushed harder. A weapon discharged, and the deck plating beside him exploded in sparks. Another shot, and Marcus felt fire tear across his shoulder. He stumbled, and Lyra grabbed him, supporting his weight. "Keep moving," she yelled. They reached the ship's ramp, and Marcus slapped the emergency override. The door began to cycle open, too slow, impossibly slow. Another shot rang out. Lyra pushed Marcus through the opening and turned to face their pursuers. What happened next would replay in Marcus's memory for the rest of his life. Lyra moved like death itself, like poetry written in violence. The holographic disguise flickered and failed, revealing her true features, and for a moment the pursuers froze in recognition. In that moment she closed the distance. Her hand struck Xerath's throat with surgical precision, dropping him gasping to the deck. She twisted, using his falling body as a shield against another's weapon, then disarmed him with a move so fast Marcus couldn't follow it. The third attacker got off one shot that Lyra dodged by what seemed like centimeters before she kicked his knee backward with a sickening crack. It was over in seconds. 3 trained killers disabled, and the Empress standing over them breathing hard but uninjured. "Get us out of here," she shouted at Marcus. Marcus stumbled to the cockpit, his shoulders screaming protest, and fired the engines. The wandering star lifted on repulsors, tearing away from the dock clamps before they'd fully released. Alarms blared, station security demanded they return, but Marcus just engaged the quantum drive and jumped before anyone could lock weapons on them. In the sudden silence of hyperspace, Marcus became aware of blood running down his arm and the sharp pain in his shoulder. Lyra appeared beside him, already pulling out a medical kit. "Let me see," she said, her voice tight with concern. "I'm fine. Did we get it? The recording?" Lyra's hand touched the pocket where she'd stored the device, and relief flooded her features. "We got it." She worked on his shoulder with surprising medical skill, cleaning and sealing the wound with surgical precision. When she finished, she sat back and looked at him with something like wonder. "You saved my life back there," she said quietly. "Took a shot meant for me." "Seemed like the right thing to do," Marcus replied, feeling suddenly exhausted. "Besides, I still need you to testify that you paid me for this job. Otherwise, it's just Grand Theft Spaceship with extra steps." Lyra laughed, the sound breaking the tension. Then her expression grew serious. "When we return, they'll face justice. All of them. The conspiracy ends now." The journey back to the Eternal Radiance took 3 days. Lyra spent most of that time reviewing the recording they'd obtained, her expression growing darker with each replay. The conspiracy was vast, involving dozens of high-ranking officials, all united by the belief that Lyra's progressive reforms threatened their traditional power base. "They were planning to kill me during the summit," she said, playing one section for Marcus. "Then blamed the Calarians to start a war. In the chaos, they'd install a puppet emperor and rule through him. What will you do?" "What I must." Her voice was cold as the void. "The penalty for treason is clear. But first, I need to survive long enough to present this evidence to the Imperial Council." They dropped out of hyperspace near Crossroads Haven, but instead of docking, Lyra signaled the Eternal Radiance. The massive flagship appeared within hours, and they docked in a secured bay under heavy guard. The next 6 hours passed in a blur. Lyra, back in her Imperial regalia, convened an emergency session of the Imperial Council. Marcus watched from the observer's gallery as she presented the evidence, watched the faces of the accused drain of color, watched the council erupt in shock and outrage. High Commander Xerath, already in custody after his capture at Haven's End, was stripped of rank. Counselor Marana was arrested as she tried to flee the chamber. Dozens of others were taken into custody, their houses disgraced, their titles forfeit. When it was over, when the last traitor had been led away in chains, Lyra found Marcus in the gallery. "It's done," she said, and he could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "The conspiracy is broken. The Empire is secure. What happens now? Marcus asked. I mean, my ship's fixed, my shoulder will heal, but I don't exactly have a job lined up. Lyra was quiet for a moment, studying him with those penetrating golden eyes. I told you I haven't had a real friend in 15 years. Then you came along, a drunk human with no sense of self-preservation and a tendency to say exactly what he thinks. You saw me at my most vulnerable, protected me when you had every reason to run, and asked nothing in return. Your Majesty. Lyra, she interrupted. When we're alone, just Lyra. And I have a proposition for you, Captain Chin. I need someone I can trust absolutely, someone outside the political machinery, someone who'll tell me the truth even when it's uncomfortable. I want you to be my personal pilot and advisor. A formal position with an embarrassing salary, full access to imperial resources, and the absolute certainty that at least once a week, you'll probably give me a headache. Marcus stared at her. You want me to work for you? The guy who called you the sexiest alien woman alive while drunk. Especially that guy, Lyra said, and her smile was genuine and warm. That's the person who sees me as more than an empress. That's the friend I need. Marcus thought about his empty ship, his solitary existence, the 5 years he'd spent running from his guilt and his past. He thought about the last few days, the danger and the purpose and the feeling of being part of something larger than his own pain. When do I start? He asked. Immediately, Lyra replied. I have 14 diplomatic meetings scheduled next week, and I'll need someone to keep me sane through them. Plus, the Calarian Summit is in a month, and after the recent unpleasantness, I could use someone watching my back who I actually trust. One condition, Marcus said. You have to admit that when I called you the sexiest alien woman alive, you were at least a little flattered. Lyra's laugh echoed through the chamber, bright and genuine. Captain Chin, I was incredibly flattered. Do you know how long it's been since someone appreciated me as just a woman rather than a political entity? You reminded me that underneath the crown and the empire, I'm still just a person. That's a rare gift. So basically, my drunken stupidity saved the empire? In a roundabout way, yes. Though let's never phrase it quite like that in the official records. Marcus grinned, that same lopsided expression that had started this whole adventure. Deal. But I'm keeping the Wandering Star. Best ship in the galaxy now, thanks to your engineers. The ship is yours, Lyra agreed. Though you'll have access to the entire Imperial fleet when needed. Might as well have options. They walked together through the corridors of the Eternal Radiance, an empress and a salvage pilot, an unlikely friendship forged in conspiracy and danger. Behind them, the Empire stabilized, the conspirators faced justice, and the future opened with new possibilities. Marcus Chen had come to Crossroads Haven with a broken ship and a darker outlook. He left as advisor to an empress, with purpose renewed and guilt finally beginning to ease. Sometimes redemption came from the most unexpected places, and sometimes it wore a crown and had pointed ears and a laugh like crystal chimes. So, Lyra said as they reached the observation deck, looking out at the stars, ready for your first official duty? What's that? Attend another formal dinner. 12 courses, inappropriate utensils, and nobles who'll want to know everything about the human who saved their empress. Marcus groaned. Can I at least get drunk first? Absolutely not, Lyra said, her eyes sparkling with amusement. But I promise to laugh at your jokes and make sure you use the right fork. Fair enough, Marcus replied and meant it. Outside the viewport, the stars stretched endlessly, full of possibility and adventure and second chances. The Empire was safe, the conspiracy broken, and somewhere in the vastness of space, a drunk human's terrible pickup line had changed the course of history. It was, Marcus decided, a pretty good story after all.